welcome to the SCFA Self-Care Show and Tell. My name is Britt Verstegen. I am a Western New Mexico University graduate student and an MSW intern with SCFA. Today, we will learn from our guest, Alyce Jurgensen, LCSW-C, who currently works as a psychotherapist and a life coach, and serves on the governance board of her family's 48-year-old business. Alyce is an expert on self-care, self-compassion, and effective life transitions. She also explores the power of the feminine at all levels of human endeavor. Welcome, Alyce.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm glad to meet you finally. So great. And to begin, if you would please introduce yourself beyond what I mentioned. So who are you, Alyce?
Who am I? That's a big question. Feels like who I am today or in this phase of my life, right? That it's evolving and changing all the time if we're lucky.
Perfect.
But before I go into that, I want to say thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here and to be able to contribute in this way to this phenomenal community. So thank you for reaching out.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would say in a nutshell that who I am is a fellow traveler on this road of life. That's who I am. I'm here.
I love that.
Yeah, that's yeah. The things that I am interested in might be helpful. So the things that I'm interested in is how do we heal ourselves? How do we move from surviving life to thriving in life? That's fascinating to me. Both are important. It's important to be a survivor and honor the things that we are in our survivorhood. And it's also important to move into thriving and embrace what's coming to us. So very interested in that process and supporting people through that process. I am also interested in how we root down into peace and ease and come from that place, particularly as survivors of trauma. That can be really hard to do. So, but vital that we find that place, even if it's a moment, you know.
Yes.
If a week goes by and it's a moment, we had that moment of being in that peace and that ease. And the things that I believe in, which is, part of why we're here today, is self-compassion. I think it is vital to living a life well, is learning the skills of being compassionate with ourselves and taking care of ourselves.
How does that self-compassion inform the way that we interact with others?
How does it inform that? I think by having greater compassion, like if we think of a particular example, right? Like how we can be critical with ourselves, how we can talk negatively, how we can be judging ourselves, right? And if we can get clear on those are the voices that are going on for us, that's a critical voice. Oh my gosh, I'm really judging how I'm doing this, and have compassion around that, that automatically extends to others. It just does. It's right. It's less work to have compassion for someone if we have it for ourselves first, because we can empathize at a deeper level.
Absolutely. I have found that myself. It increases my capacity for compassion and empathy for others if I can extend that for myself. Do you believe that that is an important component in self-care, self-compassion?
Yeah, I think that is like the cornerstone or the keystone or the whatever stone, like fundamental part of self-care is self-compassion. So it's there was a period of time in my life which I think we'll talk about later in my health journey, but I remember just thinking like, whatever thought or feeling I'm having is okay. Like,
Love
it's
that.
okay. Like
Just
this,
accepting.
just accepting.
Yeah.
Like that's like it's okay that my body doesn't want to do what I think it should do right now.
Right.
Like that's okay. Like, so it's like profoundly necessary.
Oh, I love that. Profoundly necessary. And I like that you likened it to a capstone, that the structure will fall
Yeah.
without that central idea. That's very beautiful. Just so that our audience understands, can you define what is the difference between surviving and thriving?
Oh my goodness.
It's a big question.
It is a big question. It seems so obvious to me. One of those that I have spent a lot of time thinking about. Um, well, I guess I referenced that I think both stages are important.
Mm,
And for me, for a long time, there was discussions in the DVSV world about um, people whether or not we should refer to victims as victims or survivors. I guess I'm kind of going back to this. And I remember there was a lot of debate about that. And I remember thinking at the time, no, like, no, I'm a victim and that feels right. Like that's accurate. And I haven't survived this thing yet. It
right.
made sense to me that so for this is my experience. So it helped me understand where I was in this process of healing. And first it was acknowledging what was done to me, that I was a
Yes.
victim of that. And then as I coped and moved through and uncovered it and then it became like, okay, I'm surviving this thing. Okay. Um, I can cope with it. I understand it. I'm not breaking down all the time. I'm moving through it. Then I could get like, oh, yeah, I get the difference between being in that victim piece and the survivor piece.
Right. And what I love
And
about what you're, I'm sorry, what I love
yeah,
about what you're
please go ahead.
suggesting is there is no shame. There's absolutely no shame, that it's okay to be at whatever stage you're in on the journey, that they all have validity and that they
Yes.
all have worth. That's a
Yeah.
very important idea.
Yeah. They are valuable. And there's gifts at each stage,
Right.
and it's not trying to get out of the stage. I mean, we want to, right? But it's yeah, they all have value. And so then I would say then there's the thriving phase. So I see it as victim, survivor, thriver in
Right.
my mind. And that the thriving piece is this is something that happened to me. I get it. How do I use what came out of that? How have I been changed by it? How do I support others? I mean, that's one of the gifts that can come from pain is by acknowledging our own, we can then support others through their pain.
Absolutely. I know one of the things that I've noted in the research is it depends on the researcher, but anywhere between 50 to 70% of anti-violence advocates are survivors themselves, are people who experienced violence, whether it be sexual assault, domestic violence, trafficking, but they experienced it themselves. And I like that you focus on how as you go through that journey, you arrive at a time, and actually, I think you can start this service area um, well before you get to survivorship or thrivership,
Yeah.
because it's
Yes.
part of the process is giving
Yes.
to others. But yeah,
Yes. Thank you for putting that out. Absolutely.
yeah, it's just beautiful how it can be used for good. We certainly wish upon no one pain
Right.
and trauma.
Yeah.
However, if it is something that you're given in life, there is a way to use it in service to others.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
service to others could be your best friend.
sure.
Right? Like it could be joining with your best friend around similar experiences.
Right.
Like
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a
service.
grand
It does
gesture.
not have to be grand.
Yeah.
There, it's like, yes, we want to reach to the stars, but there's a lot between us and the stars.
Oh, I love that.
You know, so yeah,
Yeah.
it can just be um supporting and empathizing with fellow travelers. And
Yeah.
that's not little,
Right.
right? So
Not at
yeah,
all. Yeah, that's right. I would venture to say that's one of our purposes as human beings is to help one another.
yeah.
And it is through that process that we heal. Oh, that's so exciting. So I wanted to ask you to tell us more about your individual self-care journey. Where did it begin and where do you feel you are today? Because I love that you acknowledge you're on a journey. It's not over. There's more to come.
Yes. That used to feel overwhelming to me. Like, wait, okay, I'm not there. Wait, there's supposed to be a promised land. I'm supposed to do all of this work,
Right.
which I think the self-help field for a long time said, like, if you do all these things, life will be great,
Right.
So I was always reaching for that carrot. And then I finally realized, like, oh, one, I'm just interested in learning, evolving, and growing.
Mm.
But two, like, it just doesn't stop. Like, and
Right.
then when I realized that, I kind of felt sad about it. Like, oh, this feels like a lot of work. And I was like, oh no, this is great. There's a lot of discovery. I mean, maybe that's part of how we would define thriving, right?
Mm.
Is that there's an excitement about continuing to uncover and a curiosity um, that's more expansive. Um, but you asked me a question about my self-care journey, right?
Yes.
Where am I now?
Hmm.
So self-care was not something that was on my radar until I began working in the field as a counselor. I started at a
Oh.
small organization, DVSV, Other Crimes, which meant we did all of it.
Mm.
And of course, I was attending trainings and they were talking about self-care. Of
Right.
course, at the end, they talked about
Right.
self-care. Got tagged on there like, now that you guys are all exhausted, let's talk about self-care.
Right.
Uh, so I started to realize, like, well, this could be better served at the start, and like maybe throughout even, like that,
Right.
it's my awareness of self-care. Like, this sounds great. And then I was like, but wait a second, it needs to go at the start. And
Right.
then, so that's how I became familiar with it. And then also through going to those trainings, I realized, oh, it's, it feels like it's all on me.
Yes. The focus is on the individual. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, Um, and maybe that's a very American viewpoint, right? Maybe that's part of
Hmm.
our, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality that's here. And maybe that's part of that's seeped into this world as well. But excuse me, I thought, hey, this is kind of difficult to just do on my own. I feel like there needs to be the agency, really, it needs to be both. Um,
Right.
so that's the awareness I came out with. That's still not your question. I'm going to get
Oh,
there.
that's fine.
So that's where I became familiar with self-care as something that you had to do that was a task that was related to your job.
Right.
And now, 20 years later, um, what I would say is that it's not a task, it's an approach. It's
Mm.
how I approach my life. And I think that's what needs to be the message is it's not something you add to your task list.
Right.
I have to like do all these tasks, go to work, get this in there, get the self-care in there, get the stinking meditation. Like, how many of us are like, oh, I have to meditate, I have to meditate. um, Years of that. So I think for me, that's the difference. It went from something that was task oriented, related to a job, that's now a mindset and how I approach each day.
That's
Uh,
really beautiful. So, would you say that self-care is akin to basic human needs like adequate nutrition, adequate sleep, connection to other people. Would you put it at that level?
It's the level, like
Yeah, I
it,
agree. It's the
yeah,
foundation of all of it.
it's the foundation. It's our healthcare. Self-care is
Yes.
healthcare, right?
Yes. Oh,
To
I
your
love that. Please repeat that for the audience because that's wonderful.
Yeah, self-care is healthcare.
Beautiful. Yeah, definitely. Oh, I so agree. So,
So, yeah.
so what you've described, your self-care practice has really grown considerably, your understanding of it throughout the years. So you were sharing with me that you began your career as a counselor at a DVSV organization, and then you went on to become a therapist and also a life coach, ultimately working in private practice while also briefly working at Raft, teaching
Mhm.
resiliency skills. And throughout your work with people, what is one of the challenges you have found that people have with self-care? What have you noticed?
I have noticed that I would say there's two main things, two themes that I've noticed, and one is time,
Ah,
and the other is permission. I think that relates also more to women, this idea of permission
mm,
to not hold everything up, right, and go take care of ourselves. Um, and I think time, what I mean by time is that we live in a culture that values productivity,
right.
and staying active.
Hmm.
There's just, like if it's not producing something, I don't know, then it's activity on your phones, activity with, the children's activities. Like there's just so much activity.
It's relentless. Yeah. And the
It's,
suggestion is everything else is not as valid.
yeah, it's, so I say time, but I think it's important to say like what like acknowledging that we live in this culture that values being productive, and how do we untangle ourselves. So it's really not creating space, it's untangling ourselves from that belief system in order to create
Right.
space.
I think you're right. It's such a pervasive attitude in our culture. It's just so pervasive. And alluding to something you said earlier, because we are such a highly individualistic culture, we don't recognize the value of being in community with others, or of resting with others, or sharing recreation with others. It's seen as something that you do outside of being a legitimate human that works and
Yes,
produces. And
right. You do this and then fit in all these other things. I was talking to someone the other day. I don't remember who this was and how this came up, but when you just said resting with others, I remember whoever I was speaking to, something came up about nursery school.
uh,
And when I was a kid, what I remember from nursery school is that they would turn the lights off and everyone would grab a blanket out of their cubby and we would lay down and rest.
yes, it was
And
so nice.
it almost brings tears to my eyes.
Me
What
too.
a beautiful thing. Like just,
And it was
to
acknowledged that we needed it.
it was acknowledged that we needed it. And then suddenly, apparently, you don't need naps anymore, like past a
Right?
certain age. Like, who decided that was true?
I know.
Like, no. Um,
Yeah.
Speaking of self-care, I'll offer this. My nephew, who is in kindergarten, he's 5,
Ah,
and he was out of school for a week, and he went back to school today.
mm.
And when he went in his little cubby, to put his stuff in the little cubby, there was a note from a classmate that said, "Welcome back."
Oh,
And I looked at it, I thought, boy, wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be an amazing way to build community with
right.
our coworkers? That if someone is out for something, we put a note, "Welcome back. Happy to have you back."
Absolutely. That feeling of belonging is so essential for our wellness and happiness. Oh, I like that
And what
very
that would have
much.
done to my nephew, like I was smiling when I saw
Sure.
it. Like how that raises our vibration, right? And says, yeah, come
Yes.
on back. We're happy to have you here. So when we're talking about self-care and community and connection, it can be simple and really impactful.
Yes. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Doesn't have to be expensive. Yes, absolutely. So one of the lessons you share with others is how to practice self-care, and you just have a wonderful wealth of ideas and how to practice self-compassion while going through significant life transitions. And I know in our pre-interview, you shared with me that you had a pretty significant health crisis that in part formed where you are right now. And if you don't mind sharing, how did your health crisis change your self-care practice and your commitment?
Oh, I love that. How did it change my commitment? My goodness. I think I would like to say first that commitment doesn't equal perfection.
Nice.
So
Thank you
just
for the
because,
reminder.
yes, it does not. So I'm like super committed to self-care and the
Yes.
mindset and approach, but it doesn't mean it's done perfectly.
Right.
Like let's not come out of this with, you know, that there's a perfect way to do all these things, right?
Yeah.
Because then it feels like pressure.
Yeah, and it's oppressive. Right. Right.
Yeah, like no. We don't want to talk about this and then place all this shame and
Right.
frustration and right, like
Yeah.
we're here to support, not to make you feel like crap
Right.
for what you should be
Exactly.
doing.
Yeah.
So I will say that about yes, commitment. My self my not my self-care, my health. I was in my mid-30s. It was a number of years ago. And I just started having all kinds of issues. One
Mm.
of which was an ocular migraine, which
Oh,
is like really terrifying and utterly bizarre. And so that kind of started my health, my body not behaving how I would have liked for it to behave.
mm,
Um, but what it so there were my health declined to the point where it was difficult to work. So I had to get really clear about self-care at that
right.
level, right? That was like taking myself to every doctor that I could think of. Like someone would mention, go see this doctor, this alternative doctor, this mainstream doctor. I was doing all of that
Yeah.
in order to get better and recover. Um, I would say that health crisis and having to rebuild my health brick by brick, I couldn't rebuild it how I had been before.
Right.
There wasn't going back to that. Um, and there's a piece of this that I will say, when we've struggled and suffered from traumas, we tend to think I'm going to get back to where I was without that, right?
Right.
So a similar thing. There isn't this reclaiming of this person before. We're reclaiming this, or we're bringing this new person in. And
Right. Do
in
you do you
yeah,
feel like your body was communicating to you, trying to help you usher in a new version of yourself?
yeah, absolutely. Because the way I was doing it was uh, through the adrenaline. I was running on adrenaline.
Mm.
That was normal. I didn't know I didn't know I didn't feel like this hyped up sort of like all the time person,
Right.
that was not me, but I was running on adrenaline. Adrenaline is phenomenal for a crisis. That's what it's designed for, but we can't get stuck in that.
Right.
And that's we can get stuck in that. And so I had to rebuild with being more sustainable energy,
Did
right? So
you at any point in this journey mourn? Because I heard you talking about that you recognized you couldn't return to what you had been. Did you go through a process of mourning, recognizing that that would not happen?
Yes, I think that's really important to say. I think we tend to think of grief as being after a loved one passes, or a relationship breaks up and that kind of thing.
Mm.
Don't talk about grieving parts of ourselves.
Right.
Absolutely. So there was certainly a grief happening when I was in the middle of it. Like, there was times I couldn't walk. It was grieving, like I can't carry a purse because that's too heavy.
Yeah.
There was a lot of grief, and it's so vital to develop the skills to learn how to grieve. That's
Yes.
another that's another
Yeah, that's another conversation.
that's another
Right.
conversation. But absolutely, thank you for asking that. It is part of that process of grieving who we were before the thing happened.
Right.
Uh, like, we were this, the thing happens, and now we're altered by that, whatever that thing is.
What did
Um,
you do in your practice to be able to embrace the new version of yourself?
um, okay. So I had one thought immediately was walking in nature.
Oh, it's
Um,
beautiful.
when I could, like being outside in nature. So nature.
Mm.
We're made of the sun and the stars and the moon and land and all this stuff, right? So
Yeah.
being out with in our elements. That's one. Two, the other thing that was vital to my healing process was, how do I put this? Seeing myself through the eyes of those who loved me.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So I couldn't trust myself.
Mm.
I couldn't hold vision for myself. I couldn't hold healing for myself, but they could.
Right. And
So
that touches on the importance of community.
exactly, exactly.
Wow.
We don't have to do it alone.
No. And in fact, I would endeavor to say we shouldn't.
Right, we shouldn't.
We're social beings,
Yeah,
humans. We need one another. It's
right.
normal.
It's normal.
Mm.
Yeah, it's normal. So that's what it's like they talk about steering by starlight, like
Yeah.
your intuition or whatever that might mean. But I had to steer through my loved one's eyes. I had to say, how do you see me? What strengths do you see in me? What do you love about me? What do you trust about me? Like I had to kind of put
Wow.
their vision in play. And that's how I could reassemble.
That's such a gift. That's such a gift.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm so happy that you were in a position to have those supportive, loving people in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Through the years, I've had occasion to work with clients that did not have a support system, and I've come to recognize that that's sort of a responsibility that we have. If we don't have a support system, we need to get one because it's essential.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, right. That comes to vulnerability. Again, another call.
Yeah,
But
right.
it's an act of vulnerability to be loved.
Yes.
So, but it's vital. So yeah, that was the community again to that.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a very personal journey, but I feel very sure that there are numerous people in our audience that can relate. Absolutely. So, switching gears a little bit,
Yes.
if you would share with us how your journey led you to become a therapist and a life coach. And for those who don't know, would you define for us what is a life coach?
Always the question, what is this thing?
Yeah.
What? If it's not Tony Robbins, like what are you doing? Um, yes. So, like I said, I started out as a counselor. I at some point, I don't know, it's in my late 20s. Um, Math is not my strength. So I like toss out, like, that sounds about right. So I think it was like my late 20s, and I realized that I wanted to help people. I wanted to
Mhm.
help women in particular. And so I found my way into this agency where I was SV and DV.
Yeah.
And what I enjoyed about that work with working with people was breakdowns and breakthroughs. You know, I wanted to help them when they were in the breakdowns, and I enjoyed being there for their successes and their breakthroughs. So I really enjoyed that work, and I thought, yeah, I want to commit. So
Right.
what do I do next? So I went to back to school, became a social worker and licensed, and started
Nice.
working one-on-one with individuals, with adults.
Mm.
That was my focus. So that was the therapy piece. And then I was aware about the life coach thing and interested in it.
Mm.
And so after being established as a therapist, I I think you're getting I like to learn.
Yes.
So it was like, oh, this is interesting. It's one of those things at the time I didn't think about, and now I'm like, what was I doing? I, you know? Um, but it provided there was a practical piece to that with the life coach piece because I could travel, I could be in different places because it was done over the phone.
Ah.
So there is a piece of that that was at that time unique,
Mm.
where before the pandemic, working as a therapist, right, you had to be in the same room. It was one on one, it was in that same space, which of course there's absolutely a need for that as well. Um, so that was part of it was this practical piece. And also I saw that it could contribute and augment my work as a therapist. So
Ah, nice.
there's all different kinds of life coaches, as there all are all different kinds of therapists, right? Which is why it's always like go to the people you fit with and you connect
Yes.
and you sort of share that philosophy. So the coaching work, I think is best to say this way. Working as a therapist, going in and doing therapy is about kind of uncovering, figuring out what your narrative is, figuring out what happened. If that's divorce, right? We're talking about grief, right?
Right.
Traumas, things like that. Like you kind of take in these pieces of yourself into the therapist's office.
Right.
And you sit there and say, okay, what does all of this mean? How do I make sense of this? And through your work with the therapist, right, you kind of put things together and make sense of them.
Right.
And that's how I see therapy. And life coach work says, okay, for those of you that have done this work, right? Like now you're clear, you're not kind of digging into the past and figuring things out. You want to move into thriving. And life coaching can be an asset, a tool that you use in that way of thriving. Whereas therapy might be more that victim survivor place
Right.
moving into, right?
I've
Um,
never heard it phrased that way, but that makes a lot of sense. That really does. Yeah. And yeah, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. I've heard other definitions that were not as succinct. I really appreciate that.
oh, I'm glad that was succinct. Yeah. It's always like, what is this? But it's like I will give you an example um of what I mean by sort of more of the intuitive work. So when I went to school and learned how to be a therapist, I didn't learn about writing with your non-dominant hand
All
and
right.
what that might bring up, right? So I learned about that through life coach world. So things like that, like, hey, let's look at your dreams. Let's, figure out what might come up writing with your non-dominant hand.
Yeah.
So it's more in that direction, intuitive and yeah, what figuring out how your body is speaking to you, things like that.
Yeah. And it makes sense that you would be doing life coaching because you're helping people on their journey to further their self knowledge and to further their understanding of what their own capacity is. And it makes sense because you're someone that does that actively in your own life. Makes
Right.
sense. I
That's
like
very
that.
succinct.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to touch on is I know that something that's very important to you is the power of the feminine, and that's a theme that you explore quite a lot. And one of the things that you mentioned to me was that connection and community are the greatest predictors of effective self-care. And I wondered if you could elaborate on that.
Um, I I find myself saying to people like, I just love working with women. I think women are just amazing. I think we're just phenomenal people. Like we have so much, like the older I have gotten, the more I am in awe of what we bring to the table.
Yes.
And I saw I think I just saw the other day about there's been an initiative in the White House, I believe headed up by Maria Shriver, talking about the importance of researching women's health. The NIH, I think it's 10.8% of the budget is focused on women, and so they're seeking to expand that.
Makes sense
So
since we're about 50%. Yeah.
yeah. The autoimmune illnesses are higher with women. Alzheimer's is higher with women. They don't know why.
Mm,
So I say this to say that I think we're having a moment and I'm really excited by it. There's also some terrifying things that happen, but we're gonna hold hope. And and I think I'm excited by what women can offer one another because we have been taught to not support one another, to be jealous or envious. And I think when we come together, like the world is a better place. Like we don't need to be divided. Um,
right.
you know, so I think I just most enjoy the insights that women have, what they bring to the table, and I so desire for us to not be so exhausted,
Yes,
depleted, so that we can be more of ourselves.
absolutely. What are the top three strengths of the feminine as you see it in the world?
Hmm. Our our global thinking, like the way in which we hold all of it.
All of it at the same time. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, what a phenomenal skill.
Mm,
And yet we are wearing our women out. We are wearing ourselves out by, right, having to hold all those things. If we could get like, if we could remove some of the layers of exhaustion,
right.
right, so that we could more play to that strength. I think that is such a strength that women have. Um, and they need to know that that's an incredible ability
Yes.
with all of that. So that's one thought is our ability to hold. I think I know that I'm going to hang up on this call and I'm going to think of all the things that's just going to start coming through. But I think our empathy,
Mm,
our ability to attune and empathize.
yes, and to experience the other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, and this is going to sound gross, but I'm going to say it. Um, I think this is like, I'm trying to put it in like not such a gross way, but women are there like when you're vomiting into the toilet and a
Oh,
woman is,
yes.
I've got your hair, right?
We
Like,
handle all manner of
go ahead.
messes.
Handle that, right? Like, I don't know if there's ever been a man who's had to stand there with their best friend and have their hair held while they vomited into a toilet. Like, there is something like so loving about that. Like, I've got your back.
Yeah, and the permission to not be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I got you. We're gonna get through it. Like, you're okay. I'm here for you afterwards. So I think we just have so much to give. And it shouldn't be at the cost of ourselves, right? We're talking about self-care, right? So it's important to say we don't give at all costs,
Right.
right? That we do have our own boundaries and we have to fill back up. But man, when we are there, we are there. And
Yeah.
that's a phenomenal strength.
I often share a quote from my grandmother. She used to say, "You can't share your water if your cup is empty."
Yes,
So it's really essential that we take care of ourselves. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah. I wondered if you would speak a little bit about your family's business. 48 years, that's a long time. And one of the things you said to me was that mental health is a family business. How do you use your knowledge of self-care and self-compassion when you serve on the board of directors of your family's business?
Um, this is an example of like how it's really simple, but a simple way to take care, which is the women in the room are going to need longer breaks and more frequent breaks.
Right.
So we finally realized, like, wait a second, no, we need like more time here. So that's such a simple thing, but around meetings, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do we need within a full day meeting? Like, we might need more breaks. Um, so that's like a really simple thing, but the being on the board provides this governance aspect, right?
Mm.
And I was lucky to watch my parents, who always put the well-being of employees at the top.
Oh, I'm so glad you had that example.
Yes, they did,
Yeah.
and I would say, which is interesting because we're talking about women, but even more so, that was my mother's initiative.
Wow.
So she was really clear, like she put in exercise equipment, she put
Mm.
in a break room. Um, so it was woven into how we the how to support one another was woven into the culture. And so we see it as I'm speaking about my siblings and my parents as that's just folded into what we do. And so that's present on the board as well. And there's always conversations about the well-being. Um, so yeah, again,
Now,
another,
because you
but
you
yeah.
touch on something I've often wondered about, because I know that when agencies do not make time or afford space for their advocates to actually practice self-care, oftentimes there are financial losses. I mean, when we have a new employee, we invest time and effort and training. And what have you found are the great benefits of really putting people first in a business?
Mm. Um, this is the simplest way to say it, I think, is you love them, they love you back.
Yep, it's simple, as you say. It's simple. Yeah.
You know, it's like I think it goes back to that idea that we were talking about earlier about adrenaline, crisis energy versus
Mm,
sustainable, respectful, responsive energy, right?
yes.
So we work can be really demanding, and particularly when um, I think of the people in this field as like warriors of the light, right? They are
Yeah.
warriors of the work that they are doing. And warriorship is not um, being tough. Warriorship is about remaining soft.
Right. To be
So
available to others.
to be available to others. So the agencies need to um, foster softness.
Yes.
So I think I'm losing track now, but in terms of, I don't know how that related to the family.
No, I think it relates very, very well. One of my favorite quotes is from Maya Angelou, where she says, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. I saw an extension of it the other day, which I thought was really powerful. And I don't know who to attribute it to, but they said, the way people treat you defines how they feel about you. And I think you're right. When you give love to employees, they give it back. Safety is so important for people in these type of workspaces, especially
Yeah.
because so many of us are survivors ourselves, and we are
Yes.
serving people who have experienced trauma and a lack of safety. So yeah, it makes
Yeah.
perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, it's vital that we not power through. Like
Right.
it's so vital. And the turnover in agencies is so profound. I would notice like when I was in the field that there would be, new people coming in, and then you would have the veterans, the pillars that I called them the pillars, and they had like all the information. They were just these amazing women that have been doing this forever.
Yeah.
And who was going to be replacing the pillars
Right.
if we're like bowing out, right? Like it needs to be a more sustainable model where we can go into the adrenaline and come out of the adrenaline.
Absolutely. And
So
it's almost as if we're denying our essential humanness,
yeah,
which is a toxic part of our work culture. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, so I'm hoping that paradigm will change. Well,
Yeah, we
just
can't work the same way. It's
no,
why would we think that a business work model, like factory type work, would apply to
right.
this type of work?
Yeah, it's absurd. It's not sustainable.
Third, yeah, it's
Yeah,
not. It has to
yeah,
be a completely different model. It's healing.
yeah. So
It
this
has to
is
be.
a
Yeah.
this is a good segue to
Yeah.
my final question. So I was wondering if you could share with the audience one thing that you believe is non-negotiable when it comes to organizational self-care policy, and then two self-care tips that you have for individuals.
Non-negotiable. Okay, well, I have to give that some more thought. I think hmm. I will say this, one of the things that I've been thinking about is it's got to be a 4-day work week, or less. Like
Yes.
that to me doesn't feel like an option anymore.
Yes. It's
Um,
intense work.
it's
Yeah.
intense work. So at the minimum, a 4-day work week, and then and have have the 3-day weekend. So if it's a Friday off or a Monday off, but to me, that just like I don't think we cannot do that
I think you're
anymore.
right. It's very
Yeah.
sensible, and particularly in this work, because it's absolutely exhausting, even under the best of circumstances. It is
Yeah.
emotionally draining. And two self-care tips. Just
Two
eh,
self-care tips.
yeah,
Have more fun. Have more fun.
I
Like
like that.
we need to have more fun.
All right.
Like we just need to have more, like just fun needs to be like like not all the time, you know what I'm saying? Like part of our days. Like
Yeah.
we need fun. One. Two, drop the guilt.
Oh, love it.
Like guilt is a distraction from taking care of yourself. That's what it is.
Oh, it's so good. Please repeat that. That's great.
Guilt is a distraction from taking care of yourself.
Did you hear that, everybody? That's really good. Yep, yep, yep. And
Like
and how, in what ways does that manifest that you see people using their guilt to neglect themselves?
this is what I would say. I think guilt isn't as always as obvious as we think. So how I would describe is this. Guilt, we're like down on the floor wrestling with guilt.
Right.
Right? Like we're like down there and we're trying to figure out, should I do this or not? Should I, shouldn't I? Should I do this thing? I feel like I should do this thing. And we're just down there like rolling around.
Right.
And like while we're doing that, opportunities passing, time is passing, and our energy is being depleted.
Yes, and we're
And
not present. at all.
we're on the ground wrestling,
Right?
like, you know? So like, I think it's nuanced. I think guilt is so nuanced.
Yeah.
And I think so we need to like, where does it show up for us? How does it show up in our bodies? What's our particular brand of guilt?
Right.
And get clear about it so we can recognize when we start wrestling with it,
Right.
you know? And then we can just be like, wait, this is a distraction. Life is happening over here.
Yeah.
This is distracting me. This nothing else. This is distracting me. So it's a hot potato. Just
Oh,
yeah,
I love that. Thank you so much. Alice,
yeah.
this was a wonderful conversation. I so appreciate you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your lived experience. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for being funny. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. And Britt, like you, yeah, amazing. Thank you. Thank you for your heart.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.